Spoštovane gledalke, spoštovani gledalci, dobrodošli v oddaji Intervju. Nocoj imamo za vas prav posebnega gosta, nekdanjega predsednika Kolumbije, župana Bogote in trenutno predsednika organizacije CDI oziroma Mednarodne zveze sredinskih demokratov, velikega borca proti avtokraciji in komunizmu, gospoda Andresa Pastrana Aranga, trenutno se mudi na turneji po srednji Evropi. Mr. Andrés Pastrana Arango, welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Let us begin with the organization of which you are president, Centrist Democrat International. For our viewers, what is this organization, what are its goals, and which countries and parties are actually part of it?
CDI is Center Democrat International. It was born many years ago now, but not many years ago what happened was that we have a fusion between Christian Democrats and center-right parties of the rest of the world. Because what happened in many countries was that if you or your party was not a Christian Democrat, you could not be in the Christian Democrat organization. So what happened is that we create this fusion between Christian Democrat and center-right parties, and today I think should be the largest political organization of parties in the world. I think that today we are 106 different parties from Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We have now we're going to have a new meeting in Panama by the end of November, and we are going to create the youth organization and the women organization. Prime Minister Janet Jansa is one of my vice president. Viktor Orban is another of my vice president. Plenović, Prime Minister of Croatia, is one of the other vice presidents. We have Alberto Núñez Feijóo from Spain. We have, for example, Ulises Correa, Prime Minister of Cabo Verde. We have the President of Ecuador, the former President of Chile. So I think it's an organization that now it's growing and growing. And I think that we need to strengthen this organization because it's the future of the world. We know that we have populism in our region. You have populism here. You have communism before here. Now we have socialism and left movements in Latin America and in other parts of the world. So I think it's a very important time for the organization, and I think that we're working every day to grow and grow more in all the regions of the world.
Before we go on, I would like to ask you about something you have said, because you said youth organization and women organization. Yes. And if I'm not mistaken, it is you that is responsible for this movement towards youth organizations, towards women organizations, because before it was not that much in the forefront of the politics of the international centrist Democrats.
Exactly. And I said that's why, you know, the future and the present is of you, the young people of the world. And we need to create that conscience in the youth around the world. Because look what is happening in Europe, look what is happening in Latin America. Young people are voting left for Communist Party, Socialist Party, but not for the center-right parties. And I think we have to create their own conscience in our young people that they have to participate in politics. We need also, and I think that's going to be another step forward that we need to do in the CDI, that is creating a political institute. We need to create leaders. We need you young people to be prepared, you know, because if tomorrow you go to a debate with a socialist, you have to be prepared, you know, because these guys are selling populism basically in our region. I was reading the other day a book of a very good friend of mine, that it's Moisés Naim, a very important Venezuelan, very good writer. And he talked about the three P's today in politics, that it's populism, and you could see what's happening in Latin America with all the leftist, the socialism of the 21st century that Chavez promote in Venezuela.
Yes.
You have what it's called the post-truth, that sometimes is how these left movements know so well to manage the fake news. They really know how to manage the media and the social media, so that we have to be prepared of that. And the third P is polarization. You've seen that the most important thing for them is to polarize the countries. So because in polarization, they win elections.
Yes.
Look what happened I have to talk about Latin America. You have all this socialism of the 21st century, when the region was the richest region, when commodities were up, all these leftist parties came into power. Lula in Brazil, Dilma in Brazil, Kirchner in Argentina, Bachelet in Chile, you had Evo Morales in Bolivia, Chavez and Maduro in Venezuela, to mention some of them. Most of them finished in jail. They were talking about that they were the leaders of the people, the leaders of the poor people in the region, and look what happened. Those were the most corrupted governments in the history, I think, of Latin America. And now, I don't know why, people are thinking again in voting them. So I think what they take advantage of is the division of the center-right. Look at, I don't know if that happened in Europe. Sometimes they win elections with 25%. Why? Because the center or the center-right parties, we are divided, and that's why ballotage is very important. The second round is very important, and I think is one of the ways of defeating this socialist and leftist movement, at least in Latin America.
Again, you're stringing me along, right? And I have to ask you, because you're talking about populists, about populist policies as the left-wing policies.
Yes.
Especially in Latin America. And in our country, in our part of the world, it is normal for the media and the left-wing parties to say that the right-wing parties, the centrist right parties, are the ones that are populist. But always, the left-wing parties win with popular support. Why are you against populism, and as what phenomenon do you see it?
No, I'm against populism because I think I could say that for me, populism is fake policies. You're lying to the people that you're going to be asking their vote. You're lying to your voters because they're proposing many times many things that are impossible to achieve. You know, now, for example, look what happened in Venezuela. They start with Chavez selling a lot of you know, dreams. They start selling populist ideas in Venezuela, and now you have the poorest country in the world. Imagine that Venezuela, and we compare that in Colombia, Venezuela is the largest country with oil reserves in the world.
In the world, yes.
And people are dying because they don't have food on their tables. I've seen, Alejandro, I've seen boys, 6-year-old, picking up a bone in a garbage can in Caracas and only putting the bone of the chicken in his mouth only to have the flavor of the chicken. And that was his food for one day.
And that is the capital city.
And that's the capital city of Venezuela, the country with the largest oil reserves in the world. Inflation, I think, next year is going to be 230%. People, they don't have food, they don't have money, they don't have jobs. And on the other side, the government is going after the politicians, after the media, violating human rights, committing crimes against humanity, and nothing happened. Imagine that Maduro is investigated for the first time by the United Nations for crimes against humanity, and Venezuela was part in Geneva of the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations.
Yes.
So how can you see that? Secondly, also we're worried because we have what is happening in the region also, Alejandro, is that we have narco-democracies, narco-trafficking. It's buying all these elections around the region. You know, I always said that Maduro is not a dictator. Maduro is a narco-dictator because he's the boss. He's the boss of the largest drug cartel, or one of the largest drug cartel in the world, that is called the cartel of the sons, of the sun. Because the generals, when they are generals, they put sons, one son or two sons or three sons in Venezuela and in Colombia. I don't know if you have these in Slovenia.
Yeah.
Those, no stars, sons. In other countries, stars. In our countries, it's sons. So the sun, that's the name of the cartel because it's Maduro, the leader, Diosdado Cabello, that was the president of the Assembly, and many of the militaries, starting with the Minister of Defense, are the leaders of that cartel. That is one of the largest drug cartels in the world. So we have a real enemy with a lot of money. And that's why they are financing all the leftist movements in the region. And look what happened. Now we talk about Stalinist regimes in the region. We have in Cuba. Look what is happening in Cuba. Look what is happening in Venezuela. And look what is happening in Nicaragua. They are after the priests, after the bishops, after the media, after the politicians, after the human rights leaders, after everybody. Because those are narco-dictators. They live from the drug business.
We in Slovenia have not the same, but a similar story. Our former country was an autocratic dictatorship, which also trafficked drugs via their secret police and so on. So my question is, how you were president of Colombia, you were mayor of Bogota, you were even kidnapped by the Medellin cartel, and how do you fight against these forces? Because you said narco-dictatorships, and in our case, narco-dictatorship is a deep state. It's our deep state. So how was it in your case, and what can be done as a Democrat, against the forces that are autocratic and utterly violent?
What I did when I was president of Colombia. You know, I've been on the fight against drugs for many years. Since I was a journalist. I was a journalist many years ago. I had a news program, so I was a journalist. And since I was a journalist, I've been always going after the drug lords and the drug dealers. I was kidnapped by I think, one of the worst drug lords in the world, Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar was my kidnapper. And he threatened my life in 1982, when he was the richest man in the world at that time. During my presidency, only to give you some figures, I had 97 attempts, 97 to kill me. And my father-in-law was killed in a kidnap. The uncles of my wife, uncle and aunt, were killed in a kidnap. But I stay in Colombia fighting drugs. I never leave my country. Even all these threats, I know what happened. When I arrived to the presidency, I said that we need to do like a type of new program to save Colombia from drugs. I said that we need to create like a Marshall Plan for Colombia. So I went to the States and talked to President Clinton. I said to President Clinton, I've made a very good relation with him. I said, look, Bill, I'm the largest producer of drugs in the world, Colombia. But you are the largest consumer. Okay? I'm poor, you're rich. Put money and I'll put money. And we create Plan Colombia. That was a plan concentrated in four, you may say 4 or 5 legs. One of them, strength of the army to fight the criminals, the lords and the drug lords and narco traffickers, and guerrilla, because now the guerrilla is a narco guerrilla. Secondly, strength of our institutions. Third, strength of justice system. And one that was the most important is social investment and alternative development in the areas in where coca crops was grown. So we started this program, and the US gave us to Colombia $10 billion in 8 years. Yeah. More or less, they were like $750 million a year for Plan Colombia. It's called Plan Colombia. It was called Plan Colombia. I have a big discussion with many even former head of states that, for example, there's one in Colombia, former President Santos, that I think that his legacy was bringing Colombia back to be a narco state. They said the war on drugs is lost, and that's not true. Why? Look what happened in my tenure. When I was elected president in 1998, we had 180,000 hectares of coca fields in Colombia. I start Plan Colombia, and I start fumigating and investing in the social side and investing in the farmers, alternative development programs. And in 2 years, because I only could be elected for 4 years, the second year when we had the money, we passed from 180,000 to 90,000 hectares, okay? My successor agreed with Plan Colombia, and he continued Plan Colombia, and he left in Colombia 40,000 hectares. 40,000. So we were winning the war.
Yes.
Okay? What happened? President Santos came in power, and Santos said, I'm going to do a peace process with the FARC. And why the FARC? The first thing that I asked Santos was stop fumigation. So Santos stopped fumigation. The first year, we passed from 40,000 to 90,000. Second year, 90,000 to 150,000. And Santos finished his term with almost 300,000 hectares of coca again. So, and now he's saying we lost the war on drugs. Yes, because you didn't fight the war. We were winning the war. But something that I think is very important for the young people, because sometimes we think that the environmental issue is a left issue, the green parties. That's not true. The first one to talk about the environment was, in the case of Latin America, my party, my father, create the first code for environmental protection in 1970. I proposed in my thesis to graduate from university that we need to create the environmental law, because it should be like a penal or civil or commercial branch, the environmental. But look what happened, only to give this figure for the young people of Slovenia and the people from Europe. When someone sniffed cocaine, look what happened. In the last 10 years, we have destroyed 2 million hectares of rainforest to cultivate coca. 2 million hectares. Second, we are going very close to the border with the Amazon. And I don't know if you know that the Amazon produces 60% of the oxygen of the world. So we are very close to the Amazon. If you see the map of Colombia, where are all the labs located where they produce the drugs? Very close to the rivers. Because the rivers are the highways for them to take the drugs to the sea. To the sea. Okay? So I don't know if you know that to produce coca or cocaine, you need ether, acetone, chlorhydric acid, permanganatum, gasoline, cement, So all these chemical precursors, what happened when they finish the process to get the paste of coca? Where are they? Land and rivers. So imagine all these chemical precursors. Millions of liters or gallons are thrown every year to the rivers in our country that are the rivers that go to the Amazon or the Meta or the Orinoco, that are the more important rivers in Latin America. So we have to be aware that the worst enemy of the environment is narco-trafficking.
When you mentioned all these connections between narco-traffickers, environment, politics, and socialist communist regimes, Slovenia is, after 30 years, still a country in transition. You sought peace in your country through democratic means, but still, let me give you the provocative question, because you mentioned FARC and narco-trafficking and the increase in coca fields since the peace, right? Can there be peace between narcos, between communists? Can there be coexistence between Democrats and communists? Is there any middle ground possible? Because you are the president of the Alliance of Democrats.
Yes.
And on the other side, there are communists, which we know that in their doctrine are prepared to use any means necessary to achieve power. So where do we, as Democrats, find middle ground? As Santos?
What I said to you before, I think it's one of the points that we have to be aware. When I start my government, I start a peace process with the FARC. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we could not achieve the peace process at that time, but I start seeing that the FARC was losing their ideology, Marxist-Leninist ideology, and going into the drug business. Mm. And that's what happened. At the end, the FARC, today, even is the largest drug cartel in Colombia. What happened with supposedly the peace process of President Santos? That is not a peace process. Because what happened was that the cartels or the members of the FARC that were located in areas where coca was grown, they never signed the peace process. And they called themselves dissidents of the FARC, and they kept the business. And you know, the drug business is the largest business in the world. So now you have, in the case of Colombia, now you have the Mexican cartels working. In Colombia, easily, I think that you could have today 9 Mexican cartels. You have the FARC and the Sons cartel, okay? So really, we are in part from Venezuela. We are in the middle of a huge problem. President Petro, look what happened with the president now of Colombia. He's a former guerrilla group. He was member of the M19 guerrilla group. I don't know, maybe you were very young. Pablo Escobar hired the M19 to kill the Supreme Court in Colombia. Okay? So the group in which the actual president of Colombia is member of was the one that killed our Supreme Court in our country. They burned it. I don't know if you remember the images of what happened in Colombia. They were really tremendous. So it's amazing that even the actual president of Colombia, his group was hired for Pablo Escobar for killing people. So now what happened? Now, before being elected, President Petro he sent his brother to talk in jail with the former guerrillas, with the paramilitaries, with the narco traffickers, with everybody. And he is trying to say that we are going to have a real peace in Colombia. A complete peace is what we need in Colombia. But my question is, how you as head of state and government could dialogue with criminals, with narco-traffickers, with drug lords? How can you give them political stature? Impossible. You cannot give political status to criminals like the drug lords. It will never happen. Nobody will accept it. But that's what he's proposing. That he wants, you know, he's banning again fumigation. He said he's not going to fumigate because it goes against the health of the people. That's not true. What's going to happen in Colombia? And I hope that you keep this figure. I bet you that in the next 2-3 years, Colombia could be close to 500,000 hectares of cocaine because he's banning fumigation.
And 250,000 destroyed hectares of forest.
More yes, than
more.
That. That's going to be. I think for each hectare of coca, you destroy, I think, 1.5 hectares of rainforest. So imagine the magnitude of the problem. But look what happened. Petro went to the UN and nothing happened. I don't know what happened with the rest of the countries. He said, I'm in favor of legalizing cocaine.
What?
And I said, what? And everybody, he said, yes, I'm in favor of legalizing cocaine because it's a way of, you know, trying to bring peace to my country, so I'm going to legalize cocaine, no coca. Because coca is the plant. Okay, you could have coca. Because coca, at the end, for example, Bogota is 2,600 meters above sea level. Yeah. So when you go to Bogota, I give you coca tea because it's good for the tension, it's good for the heart.
Lungs.
But not cocaine. And he went to the United Nations and said, I want to legalize cocaine. We don't understand that. And third, what happened with Santos is that in his peace process, Santos did a referendum. You want the process, the peace process, yes or no? And with another former head of state, we were the leaders of the no, and we won the referendum. And Santos stole the referendum and went to the Congress because he said, if I lose the referendum, I'll make the adjustments and call the people again for a second referendum. Never happened. So he went buying congressmen and he took the peace process out of the government. But what's the problem here? What we were talking, they have such amount of money today that's why democracy is at risk. Because these people, what they want is a narco-democracy. They are buying, you know, imagine in a campaign, all the money that they're putting in the campaign to get their people in the mayor's office, on the governor's office, on the Senate, on the House. So it's very difficult because they have such amount of money, and we see that happened in the past election. I said in Colombia that we have to be very careful because one of the things that are doing the leftists and the communists and the socialists in this part of the world, in my country, basically the left groups, is stolen elections. They stole the election. They buy the election.
Buy the election?
The election. For example, I'm going to put you this example of what happened in Colombia. We have elections in Colombia. We had elections for the House and Senate in March. In 1 week, for Petro, for the group of Petro from the M19, it appears in 1 week 1.5 million extra votes for his group. Not for my party, not for the other parties. The only party that grew with 1.5 million was the president, the actual president party. I think that's strange, no? I don't think that you will find out 1.5 million votes for only one party. Secondly, all the new votes in the ballotage, in the second round in Colombia, were only for Petro. Amazing that we, all the center and the center-right parties, united with two candidates to have one candidate, and we don't have new votes. The only new votes were for Petro for being elected as president. And I said this since March, and nothing happened in Colombia. But I think there was fraud, And I still think there was a fraud in the Colombian election. And look what is happening around. I've been international observer in Peru. Mm-hmm. In Peru, there was a big problem. I've been international observer in Honduras. Look what is happening in Honduras. So we have to be really very aware of that. Because one of the things I think that the parties, one of the mistakes we're doing is that we audit elections before, but not after.
No.
So what we need to audit is the after, not the before. And that's something that should be very important to defend democracy.
You're talking about vigilance, that Democrats have to be vigilant. And you're now in Europe, you're traveling to different countries. Maybe just briefly, what is the purpose of these visits in Europe? And secondly, everything you're talking about is not the same in Slovenia, but it has some kind of connection, you know, because president of SDS, Slovenian Democratic Party, Janez Janša, was imprisoned twice.
Yes.
In the communist dictatorship and now in Slovenia by the judiciary that today we know that has no right, no diploma, no any proof to imprison him. And this judiciary is connected to the people that are connected to the deep state that has ruled in the previous system with sabotage, terrorism, and also narco-trafficking. And my question is, last 2 years when Mr. Janša was in power, he was named dictator, autocrat, terrible person all around. And these two questions maybe. First, what is the purpose of your visit in Europe? And secondly, do you see Mr. Janša as a dictator?
No, oh my God. He's a real Democrat. And that's, to talk about Janez Janša, he's been, I know Janez for many, many years as a Democrat, you know. My organization is a real democratic organization. We have different point of view inside. That's you know, happen everywhere. Happen even at home, no? Sometimes you discuss with your wife, no? You have different point of view. But I think that in the case of, I'm here in Slovenia because for many years, Prime Minister Janša is saying to me and telling me, you have to come to Colombia, you have to come to Slovenia, sorry. Oh, Janez, you have to go to Colombia. No, come first to Slovenia. Okay, I'm here. For 2-3 days, Janez is my vice president, one of my vice presidents. And also, I was invited by Prime Minister Orban to Hungary. So I'm going to be from tomorrow in Hungary. Mm-hmm. We want to do a meeting of the 3 vice presidents of Europe that are in the area, Plenković, Orban, and Janša. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have a meeting at the end of this week in Budapest. And basically, that's why I'm in Europe. Well, I have my 2 girls, 2 of my girls are living in Madrid, so I come often to Europe. But I think that that's what you say is very important, that because being here in Slovenia, and you said something that called my attention, is that after 30 years, Slovenia still is in transition. Yes. And I think to really complete transition, what I've heard from these days in Slovenia is you need a real independent judicial system. Because the only thing that really saves societies is justice. So that's why we cannot allow and we cannot permit the politicization of justice. And that's one of the first things that the leftists want, is to control, or the Constitutional Court, or the Supreme Court, or the State Council, always. And I think for a real society to subsist, to live, is to have fair justice. And you cannot use justice for persecution of politicians. And that's what is happening in many countries of the world. And in my region, look what happened. When Chavez arrived to power, when he was elected president of Venezuela, first thing, control the electoral system. Second thing, the Constitutional Tribunal of Venezuela. Third, judges. Fourth, attorney. No? So that you could see that that's happening, and I'm really very surprised that still after 30 years, you don't have the feeling of what, when you talk to people in Slovenia with the people outside or the politicians or common people, is that you don't have an independent judicial system. And I think that's the what you really want and have to work if you want a real democracy. Because at the end, democracy is the division of the three powers. No? Montesquieu, okay?
And the same justice for all, right?
First of all, justice, okay? So
the same
is
for
the real
all.
division for all.
No
the same for all.
Different
no
for
political,
that one.
political. Yeah, and that's why in Colombia, for example, when we elect now the judges of the Constitutional Court or the Supreme Court, the terms, when we changed our constitution in 1991, we did a constitutional assembly. The Constitution of Colombia was written in 1886, and we changed the constitution in 1991. I prefer the old one than the new one. But here, in the Constitution of Colombia, now the term of the president was 4 years. So for example, if I elect the Attorney General, it's for 4 years. So if I'm in the middle of my term, it will be 2 years with me and 2 years with the next president.
Yes.
Okay? The same thing happened with the independence of the central bank. You elect the members of the central bank in different times and periods of the president.
The term.
So you will never have majority in the central bank. You will never have majority in the constitutional court, or you never had majority in the Consejo, the State Council. So I think that's something that is very interesting, because me as president, I could propose people, but the one that I elect is the Congress.
The one that you don't have control over. So
Exactly.
we have the same system on national television, and now it's in discussion. The new government proposed that new editors and directors of national media are somehow proposed by non-government organizations, but now we have the same system as you said. 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. So no government has the monopoly.
But you know what happened in Colombia, for example, when I had a news program, is because the government gave to the different parties space, air, in the national television. So my party is a conservative party, so we had a conservative news program, and the Liberal Party was the other party, has another program. So at 9:30, we were at the same time, and you could find that is from the Conservative Party and that's from the Liberal. You decide which one you want to look.
But we have only one television which is very far left.
Okay.
So maybe just shortly, because we have about 6 to 7 minutes, how important is media in every democracy? Because we know that even in Colombia, even in Venezuela, this is the next step of the government, to control the thought, to control media.
For me, the freedom for the press is fundamental in any democracy. If you want democracy, you need freedom of the press. And I think Janet Jans is one example. He was, I went to visit him today in the headquarters of his party, and outside he was the founder of his party, and he said, this man was in jail for 10 years because he wrote one article in a newspaper, one article, and he was 10 years in jail, so I was really very surprised. We need to protect the freedom of the press. Look what is happening all over Latin America, and basically with more problems in Venezuela. all the pressure of the government or to buy or to sell or to expropriate media. Fortunately for us today, we have social media. So that's a way of really going after and having the possibility of creating podcasts and having the possibility of create your own channel, TV channel. You didn't have this 5 or 7, 10 years ago. So the other thing, I don't know if you have in Slovenia, that is something that we criticize a lot in Colombia, is the government advertising. That's the way of buying the media also. The government start putting money, advertising and money in advertising in the media, so in the newspapers or the magazines or the TV, and you know, they will be with the government because otherwise they will not have the advertising of the government. So one of the things I think we should do is ban the advertising of the government. Why the government should do advertising? if he want to do it, and you said you have the government media, do it in your channel. But don't do, you could tell what you're doing in a different ways than buying all these media as what is happening in my part of the world.
This will sound strange, but still, European Union, or at least European Parliament, claims that Slovenia, Hungary, Poland, and so on, are countries lacking in democracy, that and this is the question, how do we, as Democrats, affect change? Because every touch, every smell of reform to media, judiciary, courts, is forbidden. It's attack on democracy and democratic systems. But what if those systems are already corrupted? Are we, Democrats, the attacker on the independency of judiciary, media, and so on? How can we, as Democrats, fight against being accused of autocracy and affect change?
Look, one big difference between Europe and my region, my part of the world, is that we never live in communism. You know what's communism. Unfortunately, we haven't. But I talk of what happened in Venezuela. 7 million displaced people. Is that democracy? Okay, 6 million Venezuelans, 6 million have left Venezuela. All the parties, all the leaders, most of the leaders of the party are in jail. Is that democracy? That's what the left, it's called democracy. All the newspapers, all the financial system, it's in the hands of the government now, friends of the government.
Yeah,
what you used to call, I think you called it here in Europe, oligarchs. Yeah. Oligarchs of the government. Is that the real democracy? So what's democracy? At the end, in Venezuela, you don't have fair elections. They're a violation of human rights. Persecution of the politicians and the political parties. You don't have fair elections. They think they will have fair elections in 1 year, and that's not true. You cannot have fair elections in Venezuela, because if the electoral system is controlled by the government, you will never have fair elections. So if you talk against them, is I'm going against democracy? No, I'm telling the truth. And the same thing, it's happening in this part of the world. If you think that your president or your prime minister is an autocrat or a dictator, you have elections every 4 years. You could change the government if you feel that that government is not representing you. That's the democracy. That's what we have to value. But, for example, what you're saying, and that impressed me, is that after 30 years, you don't have an independent judicial system, because it's the same of what happened 30 years ago.
It was, yeah.
That's what I cannot talk about it, because I'm not getting involved in politics. But the first thing that you have to change in this, look what happened in Chile today. Boric wanted a referendum to change the constitution. Why? Because the constitution was done under Pinochet dictatorship.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to change. And what happened? He lost the referendum. It's amazing, you know. And nobody thought, he thought that he was going to win, and look what happened. No, we're going against the Pinochet constitution, and he lost. The government lost the referendum. So I think that we have to be clear on what is democracy, and the most important thing in democracy is that you could guarantee fair elections and transparent elections. That's the most important thing, because it's the way that the voters could go vote and have the truth and the confidence that the vote is the one that be counted, not different type of votes.
Well, there's a lot of things that I want to ask you still, but still our time is up. So, Senor Andrés Pastrana, thank you very much for your time and to come here on our small opposition television, which we try to fight for the right thing.
Democratic television, that is different, not opposition. Thank you very much, Alejandro, for inviting me.
Hvala pa tudi vam, spoštovane gledalke in spoštovani gledalci, za pozornost. Upam, da ste ugotovili, da tudi v ostalih delih sveta se ljudje spopadajo s podobnimi težavami, kot se mi pri nas doma, nekoliko različnimi, pa vendarle demokracija, ljudska volja, tisto, kar res šteje, je nekaj, kar moramo častiti, nekaj, kar moramo ohraniti in zagotoviti, da vsi sistemi te države delujejo predvsem zato, da ljudje lahko izrazimo svojo voljo na volitvah. Toliko za enkrat z moje strani. Želim vam lep večer še naprej. Lahko noč.